Hi, my name is Sean Olson. Today's lesson is how to get your materials into the Source Game Engine from 3ds Max. First thing we're going to do is demonstrate a little bit of the differences between UVW mapping, if you have box mapping or you flatten your mapping. A lot of people that are new don't really understand this, and to demonstrate it I'm going to use a new tool, fairly new tool. It was introduced in Max 2012. It's called Viewport Canvas, and it allows you to paint on your mesh, kind of like in Mudbox or ZBrush. The first one we're going to paint on here is this blue box. All it was a box I made by clicking box. We're going to we're going to paint on the diffuse. Now it's going to ask us to make a diffuse texture. We need to save it as a TGA file. So let's call this choose TGA. I'm not going to split the alpha right now, and down the road, as you get used to using stuff, you will start realizing that splitting the alpha and using these can actually have effect on the way your stuff exports. But for now, I'm not going to do that, and I'm not going to explain it right now. So read the documentation if you want to know what those do. So now we can start painting on here. And here's what happens when you have box mapping, which is the default of a box. Every face basically shares and repeats the same UVW space. So anything you do on one face is going to happen on all the others. And if you have a slower video card, you'll actually find that painting on a box like this can actually be very, very slow. And box mapping is cool for, certain applications, but you don't always want it, obviously, because if you want each face to be unique, well, you can't use box mapping. And to show you what I'm talking about, if we were to open up the Unwrap UVW and look at this, this big square here represents a bitmap, or an area of space for UVW, which is how textures are mapped onto faces. Each face I click is filling the exact same space on this grid. And if you're confused when you're doing things and finding that everything is always the same on them, this is why. They're all sharing the same space. So if you apply any bitmap to this, and you were wondering why all the faces are always the same, that's why, because a box has box mapping. On the other hand, let's compare that to this one, which was a box that I flattened its mapping. And let's look at it. You'll see that each one is in a separate space on this grid. And because of that, if I paint on this, make a new one here. If I paint on this one, you see it's not repeating. And that's because these faces are not sharing the same UVW space. So if you were confused about that, this explains it. So hopefully that clears up a few of those issues and then introduces you to the Viewport Canvas tool which I know that some people that have been using wallware model tools didn't even know it existed. So it's a fairly new tool. It's pretty neat. Each iteration of Max makes it more efficient and works better. Its initial release in 2010 was pretty much crap, but 2011 and 12 is pretty cool. So for the purposes of what we're doing here, I'm not even going to keep this model. We're going to do everything on the one that's flattened. So all of our work is going to be on this one to demonstrate the way the texturing works. So let's just add a little bit of something here to make it a little crazy. In fact, let's demonstrate a couple other things. You can paint. You can use bitmaps as your paint, as your to paint with. And we can give masking to that. And just like in Photoshop and in Mudbox, you can add layers and paint on these layers with different effects. And when you're done with it, however you want it to look, this is just pretty stupid, but that's not the point here. And we're going to have to right click to go back out, and we're going to flatten this and save it into the current texture. If you're really working on a project, you may want to save that out as a PSD so later you can edit it. But so we have this texture here. And we're going to go ahead and close out the viewport canvas for now. And we're going to bring out the material editor. You can always click this button here, or you can hit M in the keyboard to bring out the material editor. And I have already assigned a material to this. And you can see the bitmap that we've made previously. We're going to, right now, send this model with this material into Source, and later we're going to go into more advanced things on how to get some of these other maps over into Source as well. So what we'll want to do is open up Wallware Model Tools. Now I want to point out that this video is demonstrating version 1.64, and that is important later when we go to the advanced things. We're going to pick our model here. And it's my model. Okay, so first we need to hit export. It's going to list all of the maps and all the materials that are part of this model. I'm going to choose this and export it. Now that my material is exported, I'm going to go ahead and export my model. And let's open it up in Model Viewer. And let's see here, we called it My Model. Here we go. There's our model with the texture. Now, the diffuse texture, the diffuse map of your material is always what becomes the actual texture in game. And that is this channel here. That's the colors at all the places. That's the thing you see. Now, of course, there are different things in a material, like the specular levels, the self-illumination, opacity, bump. If you want to get those into your model, you'll want to follow the following instructions. So what we're actually going to do now, though, is we're going to create a new view because I want to work on a new material. And if you are new to Slate, you may not have known about this, but you can create views. And the only thing with views is they have different ways of looking at the textures in your scene, all the materials. It's a way to keep things uncluttered and organized and just look at the type of materials that you want to at a time. We're going to create a procedural material from scratch and show you how to get that in here. So we're going to create a stone look. We're going to use the noise map. And if I apply this material and render it, you're going to notice that it's a little bit too big. I want these cells, I want the patterns to be a lot smaller. So let's bring this down. Let's see how that looks when we render it out. That's kind of the look I want for this. Now something that's kind of cool is you can take this and use the same one for your bump. And now when we render this out, it's kind of hard to tell. Let's go into our map here and go to additional parameters. Let's go to our output, and we want to increase the bump amount. So when we render this out, you'll see here, let's get the camera closer so you can see exactly what I'm saying. You'll see what looks like bump. We can make this translate into the game engine. Alright, so we're reusing the same noise with the bump. So the color of the dark areas and the light areas is actually going to line up with the way that the bumps work. But we may find we want a little bit of extra color in here. So we can create a new map, and you can use all kinds of any of the maps you have, but I'm going to use another noise map. And this one, I'm going to leave the size larger, not quite as large as the default. I'm going to pump this into color 1, and then for color 2 I'm going to use another noise map for its colors. And then we're going to pump this into the diffuse. So now, when we render that out, it's not exactly what I want here. There's a little bit more color variation. What I'm really thinking that I want is to create another map, mix map, and I want to mix this a little bit. And this is going to be the diffuse. It's going to be a little bit more grayish. Might be a little bit too much. Let's see which way this will look nice. It's pretty subtle. We may want to go and change the size of this one. It's still pretty subtle, but it still gives some variation. But see, we're creating a more complex texture here that we're then going to be able to just send into the game. And we can use other of these maps as well. The ones that we can use are Specular Level, and I have an extremely important note about that. Previously to version 1.64, Wallware Model Tools used the specular color for exporting the specular, which in the source engine is called the envmapmask. Unfortunately, when I built this tool originally and exported, for some reason, I used specular color by default for the exporting rather than specular level. And in the end, it really doesn't matter that much, but for convenience sake and for keeping things consistent as to what they actually mean, in version 1.64, which is the version I'm loading the same day of loading this video, that has changed. You want to use specular level now instead of specular color. Specular color is still used. Basically, I've swapped the meaning of these. Specular level is the envmapmask, and specular color is used for Phong. We can also export the self-illumination. We can also use opacity under certain circumstances. And bump and displacement will export as the bump or normal map. The displacement overrides bump. So you can either use bump or you can use displacement. If you use both, the displacement is what will be used. So to get our specular level out, what we're going to do is reuse the same image for specular level. And when we render this, there's no lighting in my scene, but you saw that this got more shiny, and that will translate here shortly. Now if we just try to export this texture through Wall 1 Model Tools, it will fail. And if this is the only material on our model, it will also fail. You will not be able to use a procedural material like this on your model. It won't export. What we need to do is turn all of these, flatten these into images, bitmaps. So what we want to do now is render our material out into textures, which we can do by render to texture in the rendering menu. You want to make sure it has some padding. You always want as much padding as, I think the default's 2. You should always go higher than that. Then we need to tell it what UVW mapping to use. This one's already flattened and used. We're going to use the existing one. Then we need to add the channels we want. We want to use the diffuse. We also want to use the specular map. And we also want to use a normals map. Now for the normals one, we want to choose the output into normal map. You don't have to do that, but it introduces an additional feature which I'm going to demonstrate. For this model, I'm going to make all the textures 512 by 512. So select them all and choose 512 by 512. Also, for your diffuse one, you should usually use a background color that's an image that's fairly prominent in your material. We also want to make sure this goes into a shell material. You don't have to do this, but it's the default setting, so I'm going to demonstrate it using the default settings. And then you just hit render. Now we want to bring up our material editor again. I'm going to use the pick tool and pick our object. So it picks the material on that object, and you'll see it now shows that the material on this is a shell material, and it has an input back to our original material, and it has one called the baked material. This baked material is the one that the game engine is going to need, and it created 3 bitmaps: the diffuse, the specular, and a normal map. Had we used anything in the self-illumination level, it also would have created a bitmap for that. Now at the moment, the SMD exporters do not get the information properly from shell materials. So what we want to do is take our baked material and apply that back to our model. So now that is the material instead of the shell material that is going to be used in the export process. We're going to now send the model with this one into Source. Since I used a different material on it, I'm going to have to re-export the model itself. And we're going to have to re-export the textures. And you'll notice that it lists the bump map as that normals map and the envmapmask as the specular map. I do want to point out, however, that this will not always translate in the game, because sometimes your setup, the specular requires certain alpha channels in various other images. That's beyond the scope of this tutorial, but you cannot always use a specular mask or an envmapmask with a bump map, for example. But let's look at our model here now with the new material, and you can see there's our new material that we just did for the model. So now I have one more thing to show you. So we have this material on our object. Source allows you to have multiple materials used for the same object. They're called skins. You may have noticed it in the model viewer. What we're going to do now is create a multi-material for this object, and we're going to use that multi-material to define the skins. What I need to do here is create a new material, choose multi-sub-object material. This one's going to have 3 skins, so I'm going to set the number to 3. The first skin is the material we just used. And then I'm going to take the material that we had made previously and dump it into this slot, the second slot. And then over here, I had another material that I had made previous to this video, and I want to show you a little slight difference in this one. This one has a black and white image that's pumped into the additional bump of a normal map. If you do that, this will export as what is called a detail texture. So I'm going to take this material, copy it into my sample slots, and go back to my example one. I'm going to take this material and drop it into the third slot of my multi-sub-object material. And to make this work, you take your multi-sub-object material and you apply it to the Wallworm model tool helper that defines this model. Now, if you've compiled all your textures previously, you don't need to recompile your textures. I've already done that. But I do need to re-export my model. So let's look at what it did to the QC file. Scroll down to our QC that it created, and you'll see it added this block called texture group. And this texture group has 3 textures now, which these are actually the diffuse bitmap names of each of the 3 textures. So we'll open up Model Viewer, and we want to refresh our model here. And now we should be able to actually go in here and look at the different skins on this model. Oh, looks like I need to recompile the 3rd texture. And that should be easy enough. We'll go to Export VTFs. And let's see here, the one that did not compile correctly was, I actually had skipped compiling it. We're going to recompile those. And now when we go back to Model Viewer, load our model, look at our skins. There we go. If you turn on normal mapping, it's not always easy to see the textures. But you can see that texture. You can see the bumping came out fairly well, and in game with the lighting it will look even cooler. So hopefully you found this video informational and helpful, and hopefully it goes over all of the things that everyone's been sending me emails about. One thing I want to reiterate again and again, is that in version 1.64 and later of Wallworm Model Tools, you use the Specular Level instead of Specular Color for getting your envmapmask. I'm sorry about that change. It's going to be drastic. Some people who are not following the updates on the forums and the changelog are going to be confused, and I'm sure I'm going to get some irate emails. I'm sorry about that. I needed to change it at some point, and I figured that now is the best time when I'm making a video on demonstrating how to use it. So again, there's also going to be an update of the chart I recently loaded on how these materials go out. There's all kinds of other settings in your material that will translate. Let's quickly go over those. I'm not going to do them, but I'm going to show you. You can use this two-sided flag right here. That will make no call in your map. You can also make your model transparent by using this transparency spinner. You can also use the opacity, the alpha channel of your diffuse, to control the opacity of your texture. And if you don't want that to be on by default, then check this option that says that it will only translate the translucency of your diffuse if the same map is also in your opacity slot. Also, if you have opacity, you can go into extended parameters and check this option called additive, which will add the additive flag. And of course, you can use self-illumination to make your model self-illuminated. You can experiment with these and play with these, and again, as noted earlier, some of the things don't work as you'd expect automatically because there are certain limitations of certain maps being used with others. One being that if you have self-illumination, the self-illumination map, and you have two-sided, the system will automatically use a flag called alpha test rather than another flag called translucent. Things like that, it happens automatically, but the more you know about the way VMTs work, the more you'll understand how and why things change on occasion. But I've been trying to make it as automated as possible and as straightforward and as logical as possible. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them in the forums. If you have any input or find any bugs, please also submit those in the forums and or email me. Again, my name is Sean Olson. These are demonstrations of the Wallworm model tools. Thank you and have a good day.